He was the king of the jungle, fearless, chiseled, and wild. But not every man who grabbed the loincloth was worthy of the vine. From wooden performances to jungle flops so bad they should have been left in the swamp, Hollywood has had its fair share of Tarzan misfires. Some were Olympic athletes turned actors. Others were cast because of connections, not talent, who swung and missed the hardest. Stick around because by the end of this video you'll know which Tarzans truly made the jungle cringe. Number 12. Glenn Morris, the Olympian who got lost in the jungle. Before he ever grunted in front of a camera, Glenn Morris was a golden boy. Literally, he won the decathlon gold medal at the 1936 Berlin Olympics, standing as a symbol of American strength on the world stage. Hollywood took notice. With a jawline cut from stone and a body sculpted for Greek statues, Morris seemed tailor-made for something bigger. So when Tarzan's Revenge came swinging through production in 1938, he was plucked from the pedestal and dropped into the jungle. Unfortunately, the landing was anything but graceful. The film was supposed to be a reinvention, a fresh, vigorous take on the vine-swinging icon. Instead, it became a cautionary tale of how not to cast a screen hero. Morris's Tarzan lacked not just words, his dialogue was minimal, but presence. He moved through the film like a man caught in the wrong dream, never quite knowing where to put his hands, eyes, or emotions. His athleticism was undeniable, but charisma elusive. To make matters worse, the film's tone was awkward, leaning into an odd mix of slapstick and romance that left audiences puzzled. His Jane, played by Eleanor Holm, another Olympic swimmer, couldn't save the picture either. It fizzled at the box office and with critics, vanishing into obscurity almost as quickly as Morris did from Hollywood. Tarzan's Revenge wasn't just a weak movie. It felt like a parody of what Tarzan was meant to be. Glenn Morris would never play Tarzan again. In fact, he never truly played anything again. His brief moment in the spotlight flickered out, and his performance remains one of the most forgotten and most baffling takes on the Lord of the Jungle. A golden athlete, yes, but when it came to Tarzan, he swung into cinematic quicksand. Number 11. Denny Miller, the blonde Tarzan nobody asked for. When Tarzan the Ape Man hit theaters in 1959, audiences were expecting a return to jungle adventure, not a disjointed collage of recycled footage and awkward posing. At the center of this curious creation stood Denny Miller, a tall, athletic blonde who looked more like a Malibu lifeguard than a vine-swinging jungle legend. He was the first Tarzan shot in color, but sadly that was the only vibrant thing about this lifeless experiment. MGM had lost the rights to the original Tarzan stories, so they stitched together what they could, quite literally. Over 30 minutes of the film reused animal footage and old Tarzan scenes patched in like a cinematic Frankenstein. Poor Denny Miller had to act around stock footage that didn't even match his environment. He wasn't given much dialogue, a mercy some would argue, and his character had no backstory, no depth, just grunts, flexes, and confused stares into the middle distance. To his credit, Miller gave it his all. He trained hard, did his own stunts, and endured the production with professionalism. But no amount of dedication could save a film that didn't know what it was or what it wanted its Tarzan to be. He had the physique, sure, but there was no soul behind the loincloth. He seemed more like a guest in the jungle than its king. Critics panned the movie, audiences yawned, and Denny Miller's Tarzan quickly became a footnote in the character's long history, remembered less for his performance and more for how utterly unnecessary the whole film felt. He'd go on to have a respectable TV career, even poking fun at his Tarzan days later in life, but in the jungle of Tarzan portrayals, Miller's was like a shadow passing through the trees, blurry, forgettable, and never quite in the right place. Number 10. Lex Barker, the shadow in Weissmuller's wake. Being Tarzan was never just a role. It was a mantle, and few understood the weight of it like Lex Barker. When he took over the Vine in 1949, he was stepping directly into the massive, muddy footprints of Johnny Weissmuller, the most iconic Tarzan of all time. Barker had the looks, chiseled, brooding, almost aristocratic. He had the height, the charm, even the Hollywood pedigree. But what he did have, at least early on, was the raw magnetism that made Tarzan feel alive. Barker's debut in Tarzan's Magic Fountain marked the beginning of a new chapter, but it read more like a cautious rewrite than a bold continuation. His performance felt restrained, almost mechanical, as if he were trying too hard to be Weissmuller instead of becoming Tarzan on his own terms. He spoke in full sentences, A novelty at the time, but the emotion behind the words was thin. It was as if the jungle was happening around him, and he was just politely passing through. Critics were lukewarm, fans unsure. His early films leaned heavily on recycled formulas. Tribal Trouble, Jungle Girl in Peril, Tarzan Saves the Day. But Barker never brought a signature.
He looked the part, but played it safe.
There was no edge, no wildness behind the eyes, just an attractive man in a loincloth doing his best to follow a legend. Ironically, his career would flourish more in European cinema, especially in Germany, where he became a beloved leading man. But in the jungle of Hollywood, Lex Barker's Tarzan was always overshadowed. Too smooth, too civilized, too careful. In trying not to fall out of Weissmuller's shadow, he forgot to cast his own. And for a king of the wild, that's the quickest way to become invisible. Number 9. Jock Mahoney, the stuntman who swung in too late. There's a fine line between rugged and worn out, and Jock Mahoney walked it barefoot through the jungle. When he finally became Tarzan in the early 1960s, it was less of a triumphant casting and more of a what if come too late. Mahoney had been a top contender for the role years earlier, but the vine slipped through his fingers. By the time he was handed the loincloth in Tarzan Goes to India, 1962, he was 44 years old and showing every mile of the journey. Physically, Mahoney was still impressive, a legendary stuntman with a resume that included doubling for Errol Flynn and Charles Starrett. He brought authenticity to Tarzan's action scenes. His agility and grace were real. No camera tricks needed, but where he excelled in motion, he struggled in stillness. His dialogue came across as stiff, his expressions curiously distant. This Tarzan didn't roar. He explained things calmly, slowly, as if the jungle were a corporate boardroom. His age became an unavoidable distraction. Viewers couldn't help but notice the wear on his face, the slight hesitation in his movements. He looked less like the wild child of the jungle and more like Tarzan's older uncle who occasionally filled in Tarzan's 3 challenges. 1963 was his second and final film and only deepened the problem. Shot in harsh conditions in Thailand, it took a toll on his health and it showed on screen. There was no fire, no danger behind the eyes, just a seasoned man doing his job. Jock Mahoney's Tarzan wasn't bad out of laziness or incompetence. It was a case of bad timing, finally getting your dream role only to find that the dream had passed its prime. In the jungle, timing is everything. And for Mahoney, the call of the wild came just a little too late. Number 8. Buster Crabbe. Flash Gordon lost in the trees. By the time Buster Crabbe took on the loincloth in Tarzan the Fearless, 1933, he was already a household name. Or at least he was about to be. With a swimmer's build, a heroic chin, and the kind of smile that lit up a Saturday matinee. Crabbe would soon be known for his work as Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers flying through the cosmos with a ray gun in hand. But in the jungle, gravity hit harder. Tarzan the Fearless was designed as a 12-part serial, later cut into a disjointed feature film that barely clocked in at 60 minutes. From the start, the project felt more like a marketing experiment than a narrative. There was no origin story, no sense of what Tarzan was beyond his ability to swing and save. Crabbe, despite his natural athleticism, played the role like a man temporarily visiting the jungle, not ruling it. He moved well but delivered lines like he was still waiting for a rocket ship to land. His Tarzan lacked the feral mystery that made the character iconic. Instead, he came across clean-cut and oddly detached like a college athlete on vacation. And while he clearly had screen presence, it was the wrong kind. His energy screamed space hero, not Lord of the Jungle. The film itself didn't help. With clunky editing, flat dialogue, and an unremarkable plot, it didn't give Crabbe much to work with. And unlike other Tarzans who at least got multiple films to find their footing, Crabbe's jungle journey ended before it even began. He'd go on to much greater fame in other roles. His true destiny lay in the stars, not the trees. In the world of Tarzan, Buster Crabbe felt like a visitor from another planet. Number 7. Bruce Bennett, Herman Brix, Tarzan in a suit of muscles. He had the body of a god and the name of a boxer. But Bruce Bennett, known then as Herman Brix, was not the Tarzan Hollywood was looking for, at least not at the time. Cast in The New Adventures of Tarzan, 1935, Brix brought something no Tarzan before him had: authenticity. He was athletic, articulate, and closer in spirit to Edgar Rice Burroughs' original vision. A cultured man beneath the wild exterior, but instead of applause, he got lost in the jungle fog of poor production, stilted pacing, and a film that couldn't decide what it wanted to be, unlike the grunting monosyllabic. Tarzans of the era, Brix's version spoke fluent English, navigated civilization, and even wore clothes, real clothes. The problem? Audiences didn't want a thinking Tarzan. They wanted a beast in motion, a primal hero snarling at lions and swinging from vines with reckless abandon. For all his composure and classical athleticism, he came off as too polished, too self-aware. In a jungle that demanded fury, he brought restraint. The New Adventures of Tarzan was also plagued by budget constraints and shot on location in Guatemala under grueling conditions. The dialogue was stiff, the sound quality inconsistent, and the action sequences lacked punch.
Brix looked fantastic, broad-shouldered and photogenic, but never truly inhabited the jungle.
He recited lines more than lived them. It felt like watching Tarzan doing a screen test. Bennett would eventually reinvent himself in the 1940s, shedding the jungle skin and stepping into strong, stoic roles in war films. He'd earn respect as a serious actor. But his single turn as Tarzan remains a cinematic footnote, neither wild nor worldly enough to leave a mark.
He was a Tarzan trapped in transition, a man with the right frame, but the wrong frame of mind. Number 6. James Pearce. Tarzan by blood, not by spirit.
In Hollywood, timing is everything, but sometimes it's who you know that swings you into the spotlight. James Pearce, a former college football star with a square jaw and imposing frame, found his way into the loincloth not by overwhelming public demand, but through a far more intimate connection. He married Edgar Rice Burroughs' daughter. And when your father-in-law created Tarzan, doors tend to open, even if you're not ready to walk or swing through them. Pearce starred in Tarzan and the Golden Lion, 1927, a silent film that should have launched a franchise. Instead, it quietly faded into the shadows of better performances to come. Despite his towering presence and athletic background, Pearce's Tarzan felt staged. He moved like a man too aware of the camera, his expressions hovering between stoic and confused, never quite capturing the primal essence the character demanded. To be fair, the film itself didn't help. The direction was flat, the pacing uneven, and the jungle less an immersive world and more a cardboard backdrop. But Pearce brought little fire to the role. There was no animal behind the eyes, no sense that this man had grown up among beasts. He looked like a tourist in the wild, one flex away from breaking into a halftime routine, perhaps the cruelest twist of all. Burroughs himself later admitted that Pearce wasn't quite right for the role. A bittersweet footnote in family history. Though he would go on to voice Tarzan in radio dramas for years, his film career never truly took root.
James Pearce will always be remembered in Tarzan lore not for greatness, but for proximity to it. He was the son-in-law of the legend, but when it came time to embody that legend, the jungle didn't echo back his name. Number 5. P. Dempsey Tabler, The Forgotten Jungle Ghost.
There are Tarzans who failed, and then there are Tarzans who vanished. P. Dempsey Tabler belongs to the latter. Cast in The Son of Tarzan, 1920, a silent-era serial that stretched across 15 exhausting chapters, Tabler was technically the Lord of the Jungle, but only barely.
His version of Tarzan was a supporting character in his own saga, relegated to the sidelines while his son took center stage. It was an odd narrative choice, and Tabler's performance made it stranger.
A former opera singer and once promising athlete, Tabler had the physicality for the part, but none of the intensity.
He looked the role in still photos, broad shoulders,
commanding posture, but when the camera rolled,
he moved with the energy of a man unsure why he was there. His gestures were overly theatrical, even by silent film standards.
His facial expressions swung wildly between blank and bewildered, lacking the primal presence the role demands.
Even in an era where exaggerated pantomime was the norm, Tabler felt out of sync.
What made it worse was that the son of Tarzan didn't seem to need him. The story focused on Korak, Tarzan's son, with Tabler's appearances feeling more like obligatory cameos than vital plot points. His version of Tarzan wasn't wild, noble, or mysterious.
He was just available.
Critics didn't exactly pan him, they barely noticed. That's perhaps the truest mark of his performance. It left no echo, no impact, just a series of flickering frames in a serial that dragged on and disappeared. P. Dempsey Tabler's Tarzan wasn't a disaster.
He was a non-event, a forgotten jungle ghost who entered quietly, left silently, and left the vines untouched. Number 4. Elmo Lincoln, the first Tarzan, trapped in his own legend.
Every legend has a beginning. For Tarzan, it began with Elmo Lincoln, a former steelworker with a barrel chest, a piercing stare, and fists like bricks.
In Tarzan of the Apes, 1918, Lincoln swung onto the silver screen as the very first cinematic incarnation of the jungle hero. At the time,
he was revolutionary, a larger-than-life figure who brought brute force and raw masculinity to a character that lived in the imagination of readers. He wasn't just Tarzan, he was Tarzan. But time is merciless in Hollywood, and what once felt groundbreaking can grow dated fast. Lincoln's Tarzan was a product of the silent era, a grunting, growling figure of physical dominance. His performance, by today's standards, plays like pantomime: wide-eyed stares, exaggerated chest puffing, dramatic slow-motion punches. In a time before sound, nuance was replaced with spectacle, and Lincoln delivered that spectacle with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer. By the early 1920s, though, audiences began to crave something more than just muscle. They wanted mystery, charisma, emotion, qualities Lincoln struggled to embody. He returned briefly in The Romance of Tarzan, 1918, and The Adventures of Tarzan, 1921, but the cracks were already showing. His Tarzan had become caricature, a hulking relic of a fading era. And then came sound. Lincoln's style, so rooted in silent tradition, didn't survive the transition.
His final appearance as Tarzan came decades later, ironically, as an uncredited extra in Tarzan's New York Adventure, 1942. A silent king reduced to background noise in a world that had moved on. He will always be the first.
That can never be taken. But Elmo Lincoln's Tarzan became a ghost of his own myth, a roaring icon whose echo eventually faded into stillness. Number 3. Ron Ely, the Tarzan who talked too much. By the mid-1960s, Tarzan had traded in the silver screen for the living room.
Enter Ron Ely, a tall, square-jawed actor with piercing eyes and the kind of physique that practically begged for jungle duty. He became the face of Tarzan from 1966 to 1968, a television series that brought the Jungle King to a new generation. For 2 full seasons, Ely was Tarzan, weakly, reliable, and unmistakably heroic. But for all his longevity, something about Ely's Tarzan felt a little too scripted. Gone was the raw, untamed energy that defined earlier versions of the character. This Tarzan spoke in full sentences, made calm, ethical decisions, and dealt with jungle politics like a park ranger with a philosophy degree. The show was aimed at families,
and with that came a tamer, safer version of the man, one who rarely wrestled with inner demons and never truly lost control. He had all the physical tools. Ely did most of his own stunts and often suffered real injuries. But despite the bruises, his Tarzan rarely felt dangerous. Week after week, the show recycled storylines: poachers, lost explorers, kidnapped scientists, rinse and repeat. Even die-hard fans admit the plots grew tired. And as the episodes dragged on, Ely's Tarzan began to feel like a man sleepwalking through vines. There was no mystery, no primal fear, no fire. Just another day in the office.
Only the office had monkeys and quicksand.
Ely himself brought dedication and earnestness to the role, but the format didn't let him explore much beyond noble grunts and moral lessons. His Tarzan became a jungle diplomat, not a jungle legend. In the end, Ron Ely was the Tarzan of routine, dependable, clean-cut, and forgettable.
A king who ruled the jungle quietly until the vines grew still and the audience stopped listening. Number 2. Mike Henry, the Tarzan who looked the part and wanted out.
When former NFL linebacker Mike Henry stepped into the jungle for Tarzan and the Valley of Gold, 1966, producers thought they had struck gold themselves. Tall, handsome, and intimidating, Henry was physically ideal, a silent force with the kind of screen presence casting directors dream of. And visually, he delivered, but the performance? Cold, robotic, detached.
Henry's Tarzan was less jungle wild and more action figure come to life.
The emotional depth of the character was stripped down to macho posturing and steely glances. Gone was any sense of vulnerability or connection to nature. He felt more like a secret agent dropped into the jungle, especially in his debut film, which was more James Bond than Edgar Rice Burroughs. Behind the scenes, things were worse.
Henry was reportedly miserable on set, injured multiple times, frustrated with production conditions, and fed up with the material. He even refused to film the third movie's final scenes, and a double was used to finish. It showed. By the third film, Tarzan and the Jungle Boy, 1968, he was checked out, and the audience could feel it. Mike Henry's Tarzan had the face of a legend, but none of the heart number. 1. Miles O'Keefe, the silent muscle of a cinematic disaster. In 1981's Tarzan, the Ape Man, Miles O'Keefe starred in a film so bizarre, so tonally confused, that it's often remembered more for what it wasn't than what it tried to be. Directed by John Derek and starring his wife, Bo Derek, the film was less about Tarzan and more about her. O'Keefe, despite being the title character, was reduced to a silent, nearly background figure. All muscle, no voice, and barely a personality. He looked like a statue carved by the jungle gods. Sure, but statues don't speak, and neither did he. His Tarzan had almost no dialogue, and his screen time was often spent posing, glistening, or standing in slow motion, while Bo Derek's Jane stole every scene. O'Keefe wasn't given a role to play. He was used as jungle eye candy. There was no character arc, no development, no sense of wildness. Just a strong jaw, broad shoulders, and long silences. Critics tore the film apart. It was nominated for multiple Golden Raspberry Awards and is still considered one of the worst Tarzan films ever made. And while O'Keefe would go on to other sword and sandal roles, his Tarzan remains an example of casting for looks, not legacy.